Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. We are reacting to the college football playoff as the matchups are now set. The top 4 teams in the nation as established by the College Football Playoff Committee. We have 4 Alabama taking on Michigan. That game at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, January 1st at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Michigan listed right now as 1.5-point favorites. And then it's Texas versus Washington, the lower seed here. The favorite, Texas 4.5-point favorites. That's going to be the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, Louisiana. That will be the night game on New Year's Day. Welcome back inside our Fort Lauderdale studios. Jeremy St. Louis, Brady Quinn, Chip Patterson here to help us react to the final college football playoff rankings. And Chip, I'll ask you, we've gotten thoughts from everybody else, but as the host of the Cover 3 podcast, have to get your input, your feelings about Florida State being left out.
They created a good television product. Yeah, I mean, you know, if the college football playoff is a television product to get everybody on New Year's Day to sit around and watch close games that are going to be very competitive with big brands, then yeah, sure. Like, it is going to be a fantastic watch. You know, you are devastated for Mike Norvell, for Jordan Travis, who basically goes on Twitter and apologizes for not breaking his leg earlier in the season. I mean, that is heartbreaking stuff from a young man who has had such a prolific career at a place like Florida State. But, you know, if you want to put on your CFP and on hat, they have put together Michigan against Alabama, a West Coast presence in Washington, and Texas is back. Like, super enticing as somebody to sit down and watch college football, but man, really, really tough when Florida State faces the same kind of uphill battle that like a UCF had. Right. You know, yeah. So that's a difficult pill to swallow.
Very appropriately said. And one thing as we kind of peek into the future, as we look into the college football expansion, not as much of an issue with 4 now, it goes to 12. One kind of interesting takeaway is we look at conference realignment and you look at the teams that are currently in, they're represented by 2 conferences.
It's the SEC Big Ten Challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's in essence
a year from now, yeah.
That's kind of what everyone's telling you right now, is if you're looking at the landscape of college football, there's clearly 2 top conferences. That's the SEC and the Big Ten. The Big Ten took the best and absorbed what was in the Pac-12. The SEC has taken the best of what was in the Big 12. And that's not what we've got playing, at least in the future down the road.
Let me ask you this. We knew that there was going to be controversy no matter what, because the way the championship games all went yesterday, we knew that there was going to be a controversial decision. Did the committee take the lesser of 2 evils? Is it less controversial to take out Florida State than it is to leave out the SEC?
No. I think it was more controversial to leave out Florida State as an undefeated Power 5 conference champ, in my opinion. And I understand the rationale for it. I think the tough thing is when you hear Boo Corrigan come out and say, we did factor in the opinion of, hey, who would a coach not want to play? Who would a coach want to play? And that's real. And I think that speaks to, Chip, what you said about, did they make the best TV product? Are they tired of hearing about how the semifinal games are always blowouts? And maybe that's what they thought they were entering into if you had a Florida State team with a backup quarterback going up against Michigan. I mean, look, I would have loved to see it play out. Let's actually let the teams play and see if it's a blowout. But the reality is these big brands, the 4 teams they picked, I think they were the most controversial in the sense of you now created a question mark of, is winning and going undefeated enough?
I asked Florida State fans, would you rather make the playoff and know you're going to get blown out, or would you rather miss the playoff and then maybe get a more advantageous matchup? And the more that I had those discussions and the more that I thought about it, the fundraising, you know, what you're able to do for your fan base, the recruiting, you know, everything that you would be able to do over the next month. Yeah. Like, they're going to miss out on all of that because, and I'm not specifically saying this, but, you know, they're going to miss out on a lot of that with the selection committee maybe choosing better matchups.
I would argue this, though, from the recruiting aspect is, you know, when you're not a part of one of those games, you do have a little more time.
That's okay.
So if you're Mike Norvell, you're like, no. Like, I'm talking to all the guys that Bama and Michigan and Texas and Washington are talking to. I'm trying to poach them away while they're worried about trying to win a national championship right now.
Portal opens tomorrow.
I was just saying that would be how I would handle it, but that's more of my optimistic view of it for Florida State.
Yeah, the only problem is you're an undefeated team and you still can't get into the playoffs. So obviously, if you're someone that's looking at going to that school, that's something you're going to factor in.
And by the way, like, you can't control the perception of the ACC, which I know we're talking about, hey, the SEC was down this year and there was the perception that it's a more superior conference in most years probably. The interesting thing was, like, they scheduled a big boy. They scheduled LSU to start the season. They beat them handily to start the season. Like, it's almost like they're getting penalized for all the things that the College Football Playoff Committee in the past typically gave you the benefit of the doubt.
They wanted you to do, yeah.
Like they want you to schedule those games. They did. They run through their conference, and it's still not enough because of, unfortunately, I think it really comes down to how they played in the ACC championship game. I mean, that was such an ugly, ugly game. And I'm talking to you from someone who was at the Big Ten championship game, and that was equally almost as ugly. But, like, it looked so bad. Like, Louisville had so many opportunities to do something, and it was almost they just couldn't they couldn't figure it out on their own. We can call it a great performance by Florida State's defense, and it was to a degree. There were plays to be made, and Louisville just could not make them.
Well, and that was one of the things, too. You guys had talked about this earlier, that they put up 30 points. Maybe it's a different conversation.
Different story.
Maybe it's a different conversation. All right, let's get into these Final Four matchups, starting with the Rose Bowl. Brady, I'll ask you. It's going to be Michigan. It's going to be Alabama. Michigan, slight favorites at this point. Who do you like?
I like Alabama in this case. I think this team is the most improved team from that loss versus Texas earlier in the season. And I think, one, it's been the growth of their offensive line. You forget, they started a freshman at left tackle in Proctor. He's continually gotten better as the season's gone on. This defense, when you look at Dallas Turner and the rest of the defensive front, I think what they can do up against a Michigan offensive line that struggled to protect J.J. McCarthy versus Iowa, who Joe Evans had the most sacks of anyone on Iowa's defensive front with 5.5. They were getting pressure on J.J. McCarthy. There's some concerns, I think, with this offensive line without Zach Zenner, their fifth-year senior who's injured, now out, and how they're going to shuffle this group. They have depth. Maybe in that amount of time they can get this group up to speed, but I get concerned that if this thing becomes a track meet, can Michigan keep pace? It almost seemed like they were hesitant to open things up and let J.J. McCarthy really throw the football. They didn't throw a pass in the second half versus Penn State. They really didn't do it unless they had to versus Maryland. Versus Ohio State, J.J. McCarthy made the plays when he needed to. But in this one, what happens if they get down by a couple of scores? Are they going to open up? Are they going to get away from just kind of handing the football off, playing that grinded-out style of game? I'm not sure Michigan would fare well in that matchup.
Michigan's 2 touchdown drives last night against Iowa combined 11 yards, I think, right? You know, you get the ball short field, you get the good return.
Yeah,
like I think that I've been downgrading Michigan's offense over the course of these last month or so. And some of that is health. And, man, you hate to see Zach Zinter go out, but that is so significant for what you are going to be able to do. Blake Corum's tremendous, but I think that as you see Michigan and you're slowly ticking them down just a little bit, Alabama's moving the other direction. The confidence that Jalen Milroe is playing with his game-changing plays over the course of the Iron Bowl and then the SEC Championship. This is a big, big month for Michigan to get healthy, not just on the offensive line, develop some depth, but on the defense as well, because you're going to have your hands full trying to contain Jalen Milroe. My pick in this game is also Alabama.
To your point, Chip, Michigan has not seen a quarterback that has the athleticism, the ability to make a big play downfield like Jalen Milroe this season. That's going to be a huge curveball to them and what they'd like to do. And to me, they don't have that Aiden Hutchinson across the way either, which I think hurts them in being able to get penetration and limit the impact of Milroe getting going.
Again, Rose Bowl, January 1st, 5 p.m. Eastern Time from Pasadena, California. All right, let's talk about the next matchup, which is the Sugar Bowl, Washington taking on Texas. Chip, you're rubbing your hands here. What do you think here?
Oh, fast track. Steve Sarkisian, Kalen DeBoer, a month to put together a game plan. Quinn Ewers and Michael Penix Jr. Points, 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 points. I'm going to be going over the total in this one in terms of my pick in this game. I think the line right now is about right. I expect Texas wins, but I do think it will be the kind of back and forth where you don't want to be sweating that 4.5 in those final moments of, you know, they kick a field goal or they're going to go for a touchdown, and that's going to be whether or not you cover. You know, these two offensive-minded head coaches did a great job of getting their quarterbacks ready for tough challenges in the conference championship weekend. I mean, those first 17 plays for Texas against Oklahoma State were almost flawless, averaging about 11.5 yards per play. Quinn Ewers starts 14-15 passing. I think that is going to make this so exciting. You know, you are in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, so there's no weather at all. Fast track. I think that this is going to be excellent primetime viewing on January 1st.
I'm with you. I can't wait to watch this matchup. You have two of the best quarterbacks in college football. Quinn Ewers coming off his best game ever as a college quarterback, and Penix is coming off a huge year, and to me a defining moment too, and being able to beat Oregon twice, and with the way he played down the stretch, making some incredible throws. The difference for me in this matchup is going to be the trenches. I just think Texas is better on both sides of the ball. Defensively, obviously led by Devontre Sweat, who is a mountain of a man, but I think the penetration and the lack of balance. I know we've seen Dylan Johnson go off at times. It's just I haven't seen enough of that. I feel more confident in Texas's offense being able to run the football and create big plays down the field to A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, and obviously saw Jatavion Sanders too at the tight end position. I am concerned though if Worthy and what his health is looking like for that matchup. We saw him in a boot there at the end of the game. This is one too. I'd lay the points here with Texas, and I actually think they win this one handily.
You saw a lot of Texas. You know that team pretty well. If you're going to get Texas, you've got to have enough time. But then Washington's wide receivers against Texas's secondary, you might be able to get some plays. You might be able to scheme open some explosive plays down the field, because that seems to be the trouble. Is there's just not a lot of teams that Texas has faced with a quarterback and wide receivers like what Washington has, and so you end up having, whether it's Sweat, whether it's Murphy, like you've just got one of those big boys up front barreling down on your quarterback. If Washington's offensive line can hold up for a little bit, I actually like Washington's wide receivers in that matchup.
Not so much on the cornerbacks. I would think the safeties of Texas, but outside since McMillan's come back and then Odunze, Polk hasn't had quite as big of a year as he did at least last year, in my opinion. So I'll be curious to see if they can find those matchups on the safeties of Texas.
And expecting some points. You see that total there at 63.5. Chip, you're going over on the total.
Going over.
Like over on that one. All right. So let's get some picks then for the Natty. Are we going chaos or are we going chalk, Brady?
Well, in this case, I'm not really sure what chalk would be.
I mean, that's the whole thing, right? What is chalk at this point?
Chalky based on because I've got Bama beating Michigan, so we'll see how they square up versus Texas. But I've got Bama winning, Texas winning. I think Alabama ends up winning the national championship. I think you see Nick Saban taking on a former coach of his and Steve Sarkisian, and he gets the best of it in a tight, probably a lower scoring game than what we see in some of the semifinal games. I just think this Bama team has been underrated, and we saw them play early in the season. These two teams, not that they've gone their separate ways, but Alabama's continually grown, as has Texas, to kind of maintain the course. Tight game, close game, an instant classic, but I'm going to take Bama, especially with where the current odds are there at plus 210. I like where the money's at.
Steve Sarkisian is my vote for National Coach of the Year. It wasn't Charlie Strong or Tom Herman that brought Texas back. It's been Steve Sarkisian, someone who did not have a single double-digit win season as a head coach prior to this year. But that's the GOAT. Like, that is the greatest of all time. On the other side, I am Alabama over Texas as well. It is bananas for me to imagine a world where Steve Sarkisian and Texas are able to beat Nick Saban and Alabama twice in the same year. I think you get a rematch. I think you get the best from a Crimson Tide team that, as Nick Saban has said very publicly, is so different than the team that was there on September 9th in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
By the way, credit Tommy Rees. Everyone's talking about Jalen Miller. Everyone's talking about some of the pieces. Tommy Rees took this team. They're still trying to figure out who the quarterback was. They end up landing on Jalen Milroe. The way he's developed this offense around Milroe's strengths, the way this group has continually grown, he has not gotten enough credit as at least a Broyles Award finalist for the job he's done with this offense, kind of flying under the radar. But he's really kind of now emerged as one of the stars, I think, in all these matchups we're talking about.
Yeah, it's so funny because at the beginning of the year, too, Chip, I mean, he was a guy that was getting a lot of criticism because of what was happening with the quarterbacks there, but he's been able to turn it around and turn Milroe into a guy who's been in the Heisman conversation for a couple of weeks.
And he kind of ate Georgia's lunch. I mean, there were a couple of big play calls that Tommy Rees had at the right time. You see a freshman linebackers out there, and it's like, okay, we're going to drift Jam Miller out here, run that little pick play. I mean, there's some phenomenal calls by Rees in that SEC championship game.
And that's where he excels. He finds the matchups. He puts his players in a position to succeed, and it doesn't allow their weaknesses to get exposed. And so that's a similar thing. When we see these teams all square off, I've seen him for a long time, watched him during his time at Notre Dame. Watch how he ends up game planning both these teams, I think, in the semifinal and national championship game.
Both men think it is going to be a rematch, revenge game possibly for Bama, Texas in the national championship. That's coming up. By the way, the Natty is January 8th from Energy Stadium in Houston. Thanks to Brady Quinn and Chip Patterson for hopping on with us as we take a look at the odds to win the college football playoff. Michigan currently the favorites at plus 160. Then you have Bama plus 210. Texas 3-1, and Washington sitting at 7-1. All right, so the playoff is now set. Now we wait for the rest of the New Year's 6 bowls to be set up. That's coming up at around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be back then to break down the Cotton, Peach, Orange, and Fiesta Bowl games.